Hi guys, welcome to the lecture notes web application security. Right. So this is actually the outcomes from this lecture notes topic. Now let's look at the first lecture slide. Now over here we have um, several levels. So we have internet here. This can be considered as one network, and then we have DMZ. There's another network, and then you have trusted insight. There's another network. So this actually uh, resembles organizations network. So a particular organization may have a network, all right. We call it corporate insight, and then they can have also have another network called trusted insight and DMZ. Now this DMZ, we call it DMZ because after this level, right, is actually exposed to the internet world, right? So therefore we call it DMZ. So basically, in organization, there will be several sub networks like DMZ, Trusted Insight, Corporate Insight, and for each level, there will be a server. All right. So over here, you may have application server, then you have a web server here, and then you may have another. We call it a database server. Right. So for each level, there will be a firewall, right, to protect the server or the database server. Right. Now, for each level there are associated risks, right? For example, internet, then we'll have these are the possible threats, and then DMZ, these are the possible threats. All right. Trusted insight network, there this will be the possible threats. All right. So this particular diagram actually shows the possible threats for each level. Obviously, for web application, we need to open the port that normally will be used be port 80, right? And then for the telnet, it can be 443. So if you want to, let's say, have like besides telnet, right, let's say you want to have like online chatting or whatever things, they may actually have to open another port, right? So telnet, right, maybe you want to have file upload or download or whatever things, FTP for example, then we may need to actually open a different port. So the port is actually a very crucial for organization. So that is why they'll be a very careful. They'll be a very careful in opening a new port, all right, to um, external environment like internet, all right, because the through port there can actually be a lot of threats, all right, to the organization. Right. So moving on next, in Java EE particularly, right? So there will be two things that we need to know. So the security policy, all right, that let's say we want to implement a security for Java web application. We will protect. There are two types of protection: web components. So the web components can be a servlet, JSP, HTML, or JavaScript, and then Java B components, example like EJB, right? EJB components, all right. So there are two types of protections. We can protect the web components. We can also protect Java B components. And usually after E6, all right, and we have the options of not using the deployment descriptor. So we can actually configure, all right, certain parameters to implement security policies, all right, for web application, and this can be done through deployment descriptor or annotations. All right, next, what are the APIs that actually support um, Java web security, right? So JAS, this is the first thing, right? So we can configure in such a way that we can make use of the existing APIs like JAS for authentication authorization, right? So basically there are two levels of security, right, in web application. First we need to authenticate through username password, all right. So once the authentication is successful, then next you got to figure out whether the particular user, right, has the rights to access to certain resources. So that actually reflects authorization, right? So the next API will be the Java generic security services. So this is resembles the Kerberos service. So this works based on their ticketing mechanism, right? So some like talent applications, some applications may require this kind of API, right? Based on the Kerberos architecture, right? Then we need to actually encrypt the data when you want to send data from one point to another point. So that's why Java cryptography extension comes in. Next, Java Secure Socket extension. Sometimes when you want to do online chatting, online messaging, right? So this is like we'll be using a socket based communication, right? So therefore we need to protect as well, right, for that kind of communication. So we need some APIs for that we call Java Secure Socket extension. And we also have another API, we call it Simple Authentication and Security Layer. This is quite similar to JAS, right? So this particular library, right, enables to have a specific protocol, a different protocol, right? Let's say you want to use besides HTTP, let's say you want to have your proprietary protocol, right? So you can actually make use of simple authentication security layer. So the JS actually may have, you can actually use it, but it may actually conforms to some specific protocols, right? So let's say you want to use a different kind of protocols, all right, proprietary protocols, whatever, right? Then you got to use simple authentication security layer. Okay. So now we're going to look into types of layers, type of security layers. There are three types of security layers. So we can actually have the first one, we call it application layer security. So this is what we need to focus on for web application, right? And this actually we can easily implement this by configuration, or we can actually use a programmatic way, right? So the good things, there are good things and bad things, so uniquely suited to the needs of applications, fine grained with the application specific settings. And of course we have weaknesses as well, right? So once you have implemented application security, but because we will configure certain attributes parameters, and these parameters, right, you can't actually use it in a different application, right? Each all these attributes are very specific to a particular web application, so that could be one of the weaknesses, right? And if you want to use different protocols, all right, so this actually opens up to a security vulnerable, right? Right, next, transport layer security, right? So as you learn in network, there are 7 layers, OSI. Okay, one of them is transport layer security, right? So this transport layer security is like for point-to-point security, is point-to-point security, right? And it will be relying on we call it HTTPS, and using SSLs, secure socket layers, right? And it's quite common nowadays. People actually use, instead of those days we will actually use, we just type in HTTP, right? Now we if let's say transport layer security, there is a transport layer security, we have implemented SSL HTTPS, then you got to type in HTTPS. So this things HTTPS and SSL actually offers two things, all right? So this actually works at transport layer, right? So the next layer will be the application layer. So what exactly it offers, um, when you say HTTPS over SSL, encryption and verification, so whatever data that is being sent from client to server, right, will be encrypted and verified. And when you have SSL with certificates, then the system will try to identify whether the whatever the sender, right, is legitimate or not. So this identification. So when you work with the certificates, when you have certificates, we need to have a third party, right, to really verify who the user is, all right, whether it's legitimate user, right, identification. So transport layer security, we have two things here, right? One is the encryption, the other for identification. If you look at this diagram, it has all this features, all right? So we have the client and then we have the server, right? So first is authentication, then you have the encryption, all right? Then we have the identification as well, all right? So this example of how identification, encryption, verification, right, can take place. And just like application layer security, we have pros and cons. Is well understood standard technology, all right, and it's not actually end-to-end solution. So this is very significant. Simply point to point. So when to end-to-end solution means, like for example, let's say you are sending um, data from client to server. So that server actually, the client is supposed to is actually sending data to maybe uh, servers, all right. But you have to go through several servers, right? So end-to-end solution means like one point from the client to one of the servers, and then you have actually another server, right? So between the client and the server you may have multiple servers, right? So end to end means like the source and destination, right? So point to point is different, right? So it's just like client and the server, that's it, right? So you will not have any security beyond that. So that is point to point. Then we have message layer security, right? So this is normally we apply this for web services, all right. So this is like end-to-end solution, all right. So we can actually implement web applications, all right, using Java based on declarative security, programmatic security, and message security. So this will not be covered, all right. We will be looking into this declarative security and programmatic security. Okay, what exactly declarative security means, right? So it means that we can actually do some configuration, all right, and then it is in Java, right? We have a lot of APIs. By just configuration, we can just quickly, right, build a web application, right, with some security features. We can protect components. So obviously, right, declarative security, right, method is like very easy. Okay, and then um, is fast, all right. We can quickly implement security, right, for web applications, but may not actually offer as much as flexible like programmatic. So programmatic takes time, and of course it actually offers better control, right? So we can actually control um, components, all right, in a better way. We can actually have fine-grained controls, right? So that is about programmatic way. Now, so before we move on, we will look at the authentication methods. So this is important. Basically, there are several authentication methods. The first one is basic form, and then we have digest certificate authentication, and we have client certificate authentication. Basic, this is very primitive and easy to use, supported by all browsers, not secure, right? But because we are sending data in a clear text, not encrypted, and you cannot customize the login page, right? So maybe you have realized that sometimes when you access to certain website, or let's say you're accessing internet through a proxy, and immediately you will see like a pop-up login page will ask you actually to enter login, right, information. So that is a kind of basic authentication. Form authentication, easy to use, look and feel can be also customized. It's not secure as the basic, need the session to be enabled. So form authentication, we can actually customize the login page, easy to use. But nowadays we are using form authentication, we will just secure with HTTPS and SSL, right? So this is a cheaper way. Digest authentication, right, it's quite similar, but it's not supported by all browsers, web containers, all right. So this actually digest offers better security compared to the previous authentication methods, all right. And the last one, we have client certificate authentication. This is a more secure method, but it's expensive. We need a third party to verify, to authenticate certificates, all right. So these are the authentication methods that we have, okay, that we discuss, right. If you look at here, I have given some statements here. HTTP basic authentication form based are not very secure authentication mechanisms. However, when a secure transport mechanism SSL, right, and then IPsec or virtual, right, is used, all right, some of the security can be elevated. So as we know that basic and form, right, lacking some security features, right, then we can actually complement with some SSL and then VPN, all right. So that is the that is why people, a lot of people actually using form authentication method is complemented with encryption technique and some verification. Right. So next is the we look at the workflow of the basic and the form. All right. So the basic, all right. So the client communicates with the server, sending the username, password, and everything. But the when you work with the form, you have an additional checking here, J security check, a success. All right. So J security checks is actually it's a built-in servlet that actually will authenticate. If it is successful, then redirect it to source. If not, it will actually redirect to the error page. Right? Now, how to go about with implementing security, right? For Java web applications, if we are using declarative security, first of all, we have to target web.xml. We have to go to the web.xml, and then we need to identify. We need to actually determine, right, the authentication method. So over here is the form, right? So we put it here form. For the form, you have to build two HTML files or JSP files, login page, and then error. So this is compulsory. But if you are using other authentication method, you can just use digest, and you don't have to like put login page, error page. So you have some differences. Next, we have to declare or define the security role. So every user that actually comes to their web application website, let's say they want to access to certain resources, so each individual, right, will be given a particular role, right? So that is how it works actually. So we need to define roles here. Okay, so over here we are manager, employee, right. So once you have done this, next we look at security constraints. We need to define what are the components that are actually available, right, that are actually protected. So over here, based on the URL pattern, security protected. So any client that actually accesses security slash protected and followed by any name, so they will be asked for username, password, right? And then we also have HTTP methods, right? So the client is going to use get or post delete, right? So if let's say you remove the get, so what will happen is if the client is accessing security protected, so using the get, so this particular things is not protected because the get is not there. But when you put get and post, the client actually uses security protected access, they will be asked for the username, password, right? So we have the control here on which type of HTTP method the client is actually using to access to these protected resources. Then we have another one, authentication constraint, manager role. So we want to map here who can actually access to these protected resources, right? So that is why we have this role name, right? So this must have been defined earlier. So over here. Next, some terminologies here: realms, users, groups, and roles. Right? Realms is actually can be defined as storing credential, user credentials. Right? We can actually store in a database or text file, like username, password. We can just store. Right? So that is what we call realms. And then we have users. So users is actually is actually is an individual, all right, or application program that actually access to the server or a web application. So each user, right, will be identified with a particular role, right? And also users can be associated with a group. When you have the group, right, it actually made it easier, right, to implement security policy. So instead of actually, right, tagging a role to a particular user, we can have a role, right, tagged to the group. So the groups, we can have multiple users, all right, and then we can just tag once the role, right? So things will make it easier, right, when we start using groups. So big organization, of course, they use a group policy, and then a particular group will have several users, and each group, right, will have a specific role. Okay, so role is an abstract name, right? So the very important role, because role actually determines the permission level to particular set of resources, right? And we have other terminologies, right? Principal means a username or individual ID. Then you have policy domain or realm, and the security attributes, right? So let's say we want to uh, identify, let's say we want to implement security policy, then we have a what you call parameters, like we need to work with like principal, okay, and other parameters. Then you have credential, right? Let's look at here realms, users, groups, and roles, right? So mapping roles to users and groups. So we can map the role to a user, individual user, or we can actually map a role to a group. We can do that. So if we are setting up roles, so this is actually web.xml. So if you don't choose this way, we can also do it in this way, annotation method. So right away we can actually add this declare roles department admin director, right, to the class or to the method as well. So this is actually is a session bean. So when you put like director, department admin, right, so those people with a role director only can access to this method. Other roles cannot access to this method, right? So when you put under the class here, that means that is applicable to all right? So let's say we want to control in a fine grain way, right? So what will we do is we want to ensure that this method can be only accessed by person with this role, department admin. We can also add these roles allowed to a servlet, you know? So this is a servlet, this is a session bean. All right, so next, these are the steps actually, right, leading to implementing a security in Java web application using declarative method. So first, web resource collections, we need to identify what are the components that you want to protect, and then who can actually access to the protected resources. And then you have user data constraints. So this actually determines whether we want to have a protection for the transport layer, as I mentioned just now, right? If you want to access, you may actually have to use HTTPS, SSL, and so forth, right? Now, next, we talk about programmatic security, right? So it's completely different from the declarative method. So declarative method is more on configuration. You know, you work with a web.xml, type in certain things. You're not going to type codes, but it's just a configuration, right? And then right away you can actually implement web security. Programmatic security is different, where we don't actually configure. We will write some codes, right, to implement security policy. So Servlet 3.0, it actually has some ready-made functions, right, that facilitate implementation of web security, like authenticate, login, logout. So let's look at this program. Now, when the user comes in, the user will provide username, password, and all those things. And then when it hits this servlet, request.login, right? So this is a username, password, right? So the system will automatically will check. So you don't have to write here if else, all right, to check whether it's successful or not, right? So login, right, it is actually understood as performing right authentication, all right? So you don't have to write some codes, right, to check whether the username actually matches with the client's username or not, all right? So you may actually ask where's the username, password will be stored for checking. So it will be stored in the server's special files, all right, as I mentioned now, credential realms, right? So the actual username, password will be stored in database, or it can be in a file or in server. And then once you have done, you can just log out. Then you have one more, right, authenticate. So what is the difference between this and this? Authenticate means, right, it provides the login page and then automatically authenticate, right? So but login is different, we have to create the login page, all right? The authentication will be done by the system. Right, next we have some other functions that we can actually get details of the clients, like get remote user if you want to find out whether the user has a particular role. All right, if you want to identify what is the principal name or the user ID of the client. All right, so you have some ready-made methods there. Okay, so I wanted to actually go through these codes. All right, so over here it's actually provide an example, right, how we can actually make use some existing methods, right? So let's say we are getting some parameters like from the client, get parameter, and then we are using user in role, get remote user, principal, right, authentication type. So you want to find out whether it's a form based or basic. We want to find out whether the current client is having this role. We want to see the remote user, and we want to find out the individual ID, right? So all this can be done, right? So next we have a login. Okay, username for checking. If it is successful, then you move on to the next level. If not, you'll have outprint a login fail, right? And then you throw the exception, right? And we are replicating the codes over here, right? So there will be some differences here, right? So I want you to run the codes and look at the output here. What will be the output generated by this set of codes, right? Okay, Next, we can also protect web components, right? EJB components means at the method level, right? So we can just tag this rules allowed, and then what will happen is this method can only be accessed by certain people with these rules. So in conclusion, declarative compare programmatic. So declarative actually offers a quicker way actually to implement Java web security, right? And then it's very easy just by configuration. Programmatic will be a bit difficult, all right, because you got to write codes to implement Java web security, but it actually offers better control. We can have a fine-grained controls, right, more flexible, right, using programmatic in terms of what you call enforcing security policies, right, compared to declarative. But both actually have its own pros and cons. So usually in a web environment, we will try to take advantage of declarative programmatic. So we try to blend these two things, two approaches together. All right. So you may actually have a hybrid kind of approaches being used, all right, in implementing a web security, right. Right. So next we look at the security risks and issues. Right. Of course, there are a lot of possible threats or different security risks, but here we just discuss only two types of security risks. First is SQL injection. So over here, right, we have SQL statements. We're going to pull some data. All right, username, password, and we'll execute the SQL statements, and then we have first name user. Now those days, right, you can find this kind of statement, right, being used in web environment, and later they found out, right, it has its own weakness, and we call it SQL injection. So when the user actually provides SAM and then one and all these things, so what will happen, right, eventually, right, the first input, right, it doesn't matter if it's true or false, the second one is always be true. So what will happen, true over this side, the second input, so you're going to pull all the records from the database, right, and then the user can see all kind of records there. So this is actually is not good, right. So we need to find a different way, right, to uh, to write codes, to write select statements and pull data from database. So realizing this, then they came up with this idea: prepared statement select, right, then you got to put input this set string, right. So when you use this method set string, right, it will do all the validation, escaping the special characters. The problem here, right, it doesn't do validation and removing certain characters. Here we'll remove everything, special characters will be removed, right. So therefore it will be a preventing, right, SQL injection. And of course we can use JPA name query, we can use JPQL query as what you learn in the practical theory, right. Remember the JPQL query, right, select, then followed by an object access attributes, all right. So that's JPA name query, right. You can also use that to prevent SQL injection. Then you have one more, we call it cross-site scripting. So basically cross-site scripting means the client side, all right, the codes will be injected, all right, with a malicious codes, all right. So once that is done, so the client, right, will not be no longer communicate with legitimate server, but will be communicating with a different server, right. So that's one of the examples, right. So for example, you want to transfer some money by clicking this link. So eventually what will happen is, if cross-site scripting is successful, so you'll be communicating, right, with a different server, right, because some codes have been compromised in the client side, and people inject JavaScript codes, and JavaScript codes can do wonders, right, and you might be taken to a different website, a different server, not the legitimate server, right, not the intended server. So that is a cross-site scripting, right. To protect your website from other sites, you can actually use referral value, okay, and then ensure IP or same as IP from the user was authenticate, prevents hijacking. Never use get method to perform any updates, all right. So normally use post method. Now when you access to a website, okay, when you click something, right, you need to really observe the URL, all right, where you have been taken to, right. So let's say you are intending to go to server A, right. So when you click that, you, let's say, is leading to a server B, then we know that something has gone wrong, right. So that is all the possible uh, symptoms, I call it, right, to for security threats, all right. So we need to observe those kind of things, right. So that is about cross-site scripting, right. So that's all for this lecture notes, and this is very important. All right, this lecture notes. All right, for you to know. All right, when you go outside, you need to know some. You need to have some basic knowledge. Implementing security, right, for web applications. All right. So I'm signing off here. Okay. Then we look at the next. We will meet up for the next lecture.